Hey, this is Jeff Harmon with Brilliance Within. Excited to bring you a new episode of Conversations That Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today, I get to welcome Panna Sharma, the CEO of Lantern Pharma. And who Panna has become to me is generosity and genuineness. I think those qualities really come through in this conversation. Panna, over the years, has developed a mission and values-driven approach to leadership, and he talks about that throughout our conversation. I hope you enjoy. Panna, welcome. It is so exciting to have you today, and I've been excited since we had a chance to set this conversation up to dive in. You just heard a really brief introduction of who you've become to me, who you are to me. And I would love, as we get started here, just for you to share with the audience, share with us, what are you up to in the world right now?
Sure, thanks, Jeff. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm running a company called Lantern Pharma. We're a publicly traded company on NASDAQ, ticker LTRN. I'll try to make this as little of a commercial about Lantern, but that's what I'm spending 18, 20 hours a day on. And it's very exciting. It's a culmination for me of a lot of the things that I've been working on in my career, which is, trying to shape the future of cancer, trying to make drugs cheaper and more cost effective, but using data and artificial intelligence to do so. And I think we have the opportunity now to really start what I think is going to be a golden age in medicine because of AI and machine learning. We have data available today that has never been available before, and more of it. And we're generating more data every year than we've generated the past 3 to 5 years. And a lot of that is complex biological data about various genomic, biomarker, clinical features across a variety of diseases. And at Lantern, we're trying to point that understanding to better create drugs faster with reduced risk, higher impact, lower timelines, and most importantly to me, with something that can impact patients in the healthcare system, because cancer drugs should not cost $500,000 to $1 million. As much as we like to think about all the advances in therapy, which have really happened, we still today have less cancer drugs than the cancers that we know. Mm. And we have about between 80 and 90 cancer drugs that are targeted. But we have hundreds of different genomic features in cancers that are totally different. And so we've got a long ways to go, and we can't do it at a cost of $1 to $3 billion per drug. We got to take a zero off of that, or maybe even more. Every industry has done that. Take a look at Uber. It's slashed the price of transportation. AI has slashed the price of space travel, underwater sea exploration, creating clothing, creating furniture, financial service transactions, free. But yet, drugs still cost billions of dollars because there's so much data that's wasted, that's not fully appreciated, it's not opened up, it's not collaborated with, and then we're not applying machine learning algorithms on top of it to generate new insights. And so there's a huge, huge open area. And so we're one of a handful of companies that's applying AI and machine learning to develop new drugs and to rescue existing drugs. When I joined the company back in late 2018, we had one drug program that the company was pursuing. When I took the company public in June of 2020, we had 3 programs. And today, June of 2022, we're starting the June of 2022, we have 9. Mm. That's for a company that's spending between $3 and $5 million a quarter. So at a fraction of the cost, we've ballooned our pipeline significantly. Mm.
Panna, why cancer? So that's the work of Lantern. Your last stop before your stop before Lantern was cancer genetics. For you, why cancer? And all the places that you could apply your experience and your know-how, and why cancer?
I think one, just the experience set. I was also managing member of a joint venture with Mayo Clinic, where I got to meet a lot of top cancer researchers. Obviously, my experience while at Cancer Genetics was great. I got to see patients firsthand impacted by not understanding their cancer enough. I also got to see trials that were shelved or failed, but the drug worked in certain patients and not all patients. And so all these were problems that kind of sat in the back of my mind. How can we make drugs more affordable? How can we make the best of each molecule to target the right kinds of things that we can go after? And of course, then, I'd built a network over years. And, that's obvious. One is your own strength. Second, there's a crying need to change what's going on in cancer. And third, data is available. So there are a lot of other disease areas, neurological conditions, psychedelic, psychological conditions, but there's a dearth of data today. But cancer has reached a greater level of maturity where we understand oncogenes, we understand gene networks, we have, a lot of initial bioinformatic data about signatures. And so to me, that's a perfect area where we're going to see a lot of momentum. And we're seeing that also in other areas like rare diseases, single monogenic diseases. So I think, like I said, we're living in a golden age. We've got better biological modalities that we understand. We have better tools at our disposal. We have patients that are willing to share data. We have data coming out of labs around the world. We didn't have that 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we had maybe 100 great labs. Today, we have thousands. And so it's just, but in cancer, we're really primed. We still have not solved the number one problem in cancer is how do we generate targeted, effective medicines cheaper and faster. And so what we've unlocked is the ability to create targeted drugs, EGFR inhibitors, NTRK inhibitors, MET, FLT3, KRAS G12C, all these targets. But cancers find their way around these targets. And so, we're really in the early innings of this. And to create every one of those drugs has cost literally between $800 and $3 billion. So, and it takes a long time. So if we can even cut that time in half or cut it by 75% and change the cost structure from, an average of 1.3, 1.4 billion down to 500 million, you're going to make a huge impact because people talk about wanting drugs cheaper, which I think is really important. I'm a big believer in that. Not that government should control it, but we as leaders in the industry should want to provide more value to patients faster, just like every industry wants to, right? If you ask the CEO of Uber, he wants to transport more people. He wants to do it at a reduced cost and ease of use, and in science, we should want to do that also. We should think about the end patient. I don't want the person to have to pay $1 million for that drug if they can pay 100,000. And I can make it more widely available. If I can move it from 100,000 to 10,000, make it globally available. And the only way to do that is it can't cost me $1 billion to make a drug. Because if it costs me $1 billion, then the cycle repeats itself. It's the only way to do it is to smash and compress the cost of developing the product. And the only way to do that is through the use of AI and data, because we can't hire an army of people that are trained enough, but we can hire an army of CPUs and GPUs and memory banks to give us all the data faster and crunch through it and generate correlations that we can then sort through. So I think the future of drug development is going to be very different. It's going to be half AI and data scientists and half biologists and drug development professionals. And that's exactly the model we have at Lantern. And it's not without its challenges. It's certainly not as easy as just putting those two types of people and teams together. There's a lot of glue that's needed. There's a lot of hand-holding. There's a lot of management. There's a lot of complex questions that you're going after that have never been looked at before. And so it's going to take a while to sort through this. But I think at the end of this, I think in 10 years when we look back, we're going to be able to look back and say probably on an inflation-adjusted basis, because inflation on an inflation-adjusted basis that we have cut the costs of developing drugs by 50%. So that would be huge because that saving should inure to the benefit of the patients.
Yeah. Have you always been, I'm going to use a term that just popped into my head, a problem opportunist? It sounds like, because you could have taken your gifts in a lot of different places to have a big impact. I was an opportunist where you looked at the landscape and said, and made a decision, okay, that's what I'm going to go after.
Yeah. So I started my career actually, believe it or not, more in the tech and fintech industry. And I think after a long, hard look at the mirror and discussions with my dad, actually, and I thought that I really needed to focus my time and talent on something that would make more of an impact on society and people. And I couldn't be a clinician or doctor, which I guess every Indian person wants to be. People still confuse me for one. But I thought, I want to focus on something that is real. And so that drew me toward life sciences, hard sciences. And I, really focused on understanding the complexities of life sciences. And I ran one of the largest investment banking groups focused on life sciences. And I really became a student of that area, and I really fell in love with precision medicine. And I thought that I could focus there because it was tangibly impacting people. I wasn't just creating new technology or new modalities or discovering things that may 20 years later hit. I was actually making an impact and bringing new companies and technologies to market to impact patient outcomes. And that was one of the things I loved about cancer genetics, is that we impacted tens of thousands of patients every year by improving their diagnosis, by speeding up clinical trials. And it's also where I realized that the opportunity of all this data, that data was just going into vapor, was going into exhaust. And so, as I thought more about what could we do, when I left, the opportunity was great, because I was really already thinking at the forefront of how do we use these emerging computational techniques. And when I first started looking at warehousing and thinking about all this data, it was very expensive. We couldn't do it at CGI the way we want to do it. But now we could do it in the cloud. I could probably do it off of my phone right now. I could probably do more on my phone today in 2022 than I could have back at CGI in 2015 at a cost. And I remember thinking about this cost because when we were writing our S1, 5 years ago, it would have cost close to $100,000 a month for us to do what we wanted to do. So it's very prohibitive, for a small company to just go ahead and shell out 1.2 million on just core IT infrastructure, and then it's going to balloon. But today, that $100,000 cost, guess how much it translates to, roughly? 8,000.
I was going to say a 10. I was going to say,
yeah, it's pretty amazing.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you referred to your dad. Do you remember that? It's probably more than one conversation, but do you remember what he said to you? What was
I don't remember all the details, but I do remember it was, he was trying to understand what all these tech projects and tech company, what they really did.
And what was it in those conversations that was the aha moment for you?
That I was wasting my time. That I was wasting my time unless I focused on something that was going to at least impact society and people. And at the same time, I had another mentor that actually brought me to cancer genetics, and he said almost the same thing, actually. And he was a very successful billionaire, John Papajohn, and he also said, you're wasting your talents. You should really run and grow companies. And he said, and I, of course he had a motive because he had a company for me to run and grow, but, he didn't say it lightly. I was consulting to him across a number of different categories, and obviously he had access to tons of talent. And so those kind of things came at the same time. And I remember one of my big clients at the time, this is when I was in banking consulting, had asked me if they were going to set up a new division, and they wanted me to consider running that group. And I'd done a lot of consulting with them for a couple of years. This is a pretty big group, but a division of a large life science company. And, so all these things were poking at me at the same time. And so it made me realize, I should make a change at this point. And at that point I was, God, how old was I about to turn? Maybe close to 40. So it was the right time. I had done a lot of work. I started college really early. I started my career early, and so I was about to be 40. And I thought, I'm about to go into a peak period, at least, potential professional productivity, and I shouldn't waste it. I should really try to grow things. And so I'm really committed to that, and I want to grow things that impact people, that impact, that leave a mark, that say, hey, I created a drug that help thousands of patients. It's one of the reasons we started our pediatric cancer program. And a lot of people thought that that was foolish. And, there's only been 4 cancer drugs approved in children's cancers. And we had a really interesting signal with one of our molecules, and it worked really well in a certain type of pediatric cancer. And I talked to board members and others, and they said, well, we don't know. This is, only 4 drugs have been approved. There's lots of challenges. It's going to suck up a lot of your resources and time. And I said, well, if we can make an impact, that would be huge, right? Massive. And we can do so at a fraction of the cost that other companies have used. And so I was pretty excited about it. We talked to a couple of folks. So I think it's that ability to make an impact. It's, it is, like you said, a problem opportunist, but it's also, can it translate to actually making a tangible impact that people can look back at and say, and especially me, and say, wow, that was actually a useful exercise.
Yeah. And you're pulling back the curtain quite a bit on your story. And I would love for you to, I would love to hear something out of your story that most people wouldn't know from your LinkedIn profile or a Google search that has really shaped you.
I think, I grew up, one thing people might not know, I grew up in a household of 6 kids. I was the oldest of 6 kids. So we had a pretty crazy, busy household of 6 kids. That's not preparing my LinkedIn profile. My dad was one of the very first Indian Punjabi families in Southern California, and he sponsored probably a dozen other families and family members. So I always grew up in a very busy household, so, wanting a little bit of alone time and meditative time was always very important. It's why I ran away from, not really running away, but I went from LA to Boston for school. And I don't think that's always apparent, and that's been, I think, something I always think about. My dad has always impacted people. So, I'd like to try to do that.
What was the impact of being the eldest of 6?
Oh, it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. And you get a lot of life lessons and patience over and over again. So
do you sense that the fingerprint of those early experiences? Do you sense that?
A lot
still today?
A lot, totally. Especially now that I'm a dad. Your family, small and large. Yes, I see that all the time now. So I'm really glad that I had a big, complex and active, family. It's really given me perspective that I think is, I'm actually able to reach and think about now that I'm, over 50, it still continues to help me. And so that's one of the things I always think about is, how can I, what can I learn? What can I do differently? That's just part of my cycle of thought. I always, even after I do, whether it be like an interview or a meeting or write an article and I'm done, I don't always say, oh, great, I'm done. I'm excited. I always like, okay, I'm done. What would I have done differently? How can I improve it? And so I've learned now to do that in a way, not only with myself, but unfortunately that actually translates to how you interact with your colleagues and your family members. You don't always sit and enjoy that moment of, accomplishment enough. You go back and try to reflect on improvements. But now I do it differently. Now I try to do it with more patience. Now I try to do it with trying to reflect on the excitement of that accomplishment, and then try to go back and bring some perspective to how you would do it differently and better. So that's something that, I can't say I've ever mastered. I'm still trying to master it, but that's something that's really important for me in the next phase of my growth, is to try to capture the excitement of accomplishment, but not dwell in it, but understand that people may want to dwell in it longer than I may want to. But how do I build off of that to say, okay, now is the best time to also to reflect on improving that, because there's always room for massive improvement. So that's something, that cycle is something I'm trying to get better and better at.
Could you give us this is a really powerful principle of being present in the moment, learning, reflecting. Could you give us a real life example of what that has looked like for you most recently, maybe a recent of that. Like,
there's a lot of examples. I mean, I can do it in my personal life, my kids, or I can do it for professional life. I mean, we had our earnings call a few weeks ago and people were excited. We did it all through Zoom. Second time we did a Zoom webinar, it went pretty well. And so I remember I wanted to right away dig into how would we do it differently? How do we improve it? And I had to catch myself and say, well, that doesn't recognize the accomplishment of the whole team, and that sit on deaf ears, and that comes actually from reflecting upon how I interacted with my siblings as the oldest, always pushing them to like, oh, do this, do that, do this better. I did my math this way. I did my spelling this way, as opposed to recognizing whatever unique accomplishments and rewards they had. It would have turned out so differently. And so I think about that a lot. And so, after the earnings call, send out a nice note. Here's some exciting things. Look forward to the next one. Let's have love your input on how we can do X, Y, Z better. And that way you can make people owners of making X, Y, Z better. And, so it's part management, it's part reflection, it's also just part patience. It's all those things that they all come together, And so that's how you get I learned that because I didn't do it all that well with my siblings. I didn't do it all that well in the earlier part of my career, but now I think there are ways, and I always thought it would slow you down, but it doesn't really slow you down. It actually speeds up long-term development. And that's something that I think a lot of younger managers and CEOs don't fully appreciate. And so one of the key things I think about now is how can I not be involved in the next round of whatever is being done? And so that to me means I need to have more patience and give people a greater sense of long-term ownership. And that is not accomplished by methods that I used in the past. And so, it's part of just changing and maturing. And I wish I would have done this 20 years ago.
I remember in a conversation that I listened to another podcast, you used a phrase, and you're making me think of it in this moment. The phrase, and you can correct me with the exact words, but I think it was something like, don't be afraid to move ahead without me. And that really struck me, and it caused me to think about that when you slowing down, trusting, letting people learn and grow. What is that phrase? Could you just say a little bit more about that phrase? Don't be afraid to move ahead without me.
Yeah, that's thanks for observing that. It's something I really want to make sure is really embedded more and more into our team. Oftentimes, you'll be the bottleneck as a CEO or a founder or a key executive in terms of not just decision making, but small details. And some people revel in that, but that cripples the team and it cripples accomplishment. And so one of the things that people are often afraid to do, they're often afraid to move ahead. They're often afraid to make a key decision, make the phone call, finalize a contract, push an agreement forward, get all the data, load data, agree to terms, because they're afraid what is the impact? How will I look? Have I thought of everything? And so I think one of the key things, especially if it's not significant dollars, but one of the key things is, letting the team know that part of their job is to make decisions. And I can't be around for every decision as we grow the company, nor am I qualified to be around for every decision. A lot of times people want to say, well, I openly discuss this. So it becomes like a cover your rear moment. But, I don't want those people around. I want people to make decisions and be leaders and move ahead. And maybe the first time you can coach them, but the second and third and fourth time, they should be more comfortable. Because if I have 10 great people who are making those decisions consistently, and they're not always going to be right, but if they're 51% right, that moves the company at a pace that I can't move it. And even if I had 2 or 3 of me, couldn't move it. And that's a multiplier and magnifier effect. And so you have to have a culture where people long-term feel like they can move the needle ahead. Number one, I don't need the credit. Number two, I don't want to be a bottleneck. Number three, I want to create great leaders that can make decisions and be future CEOs or CFOs or other people in the C-suite. And so that is all about letting people move ahead, but letting them know that they should move ahead. That progress is critical, because if you're not making progress in a company, you're going to fall.
Yeah. Trust is so important in that, Panna. I can imagine not only you trusting them, but they trusting you that you mean what you really say when you say, don't be afraid to move ahead without me. How do you break through the scar tissue that people come into Lantern with because they were burned? Because the CEO told them, I trust you, go ahead, and they didn't really mean it. How do you break through that? I'm calling it scar tissue, because we all have scars.
We all have that. I think in the COVID environment, it's been more challenging even. But I think since we're a mission-driven company, I think a lot of that begins to fall by the wayside. We're a small company, 20 people, not a lot of room for politics but I think it's just, living by kind of those values on a daily basis, but also if people do move ahead, making sure that they are really moving. Not hiding, and so I like to hold people accountable very clearly. So if you move ahead, that's great. But if you're not moving ahead and you've told me you moved ahead, then we're going to have a bigger discussion. And I think one of the mentors I had in the past said, you should hire slowly and fire quickly. And so, people will have scar tissue from the past, but in a small company, I think we're probably not as impacted by the historical scar tissue as much as we are by our own dynamics. So having a dynamic where people are accountable and held toward excellence and expected to be achieving toward the mission is really important. And so I don't know how we do that. I guess I'll learn, we'll have to learn how to do that. But given the pandemic, it's been difficult to have the kind of rich non-agenda based interactions with people one-on-one. And that's where you really get rid of scar tissue and build trust, is not by, hey, did you cover all 5 things you told me you were going to cover in your agenda? That's great for Zoom, but it's talking about what observations they had that they didn't bring up with the team, or what ideas they would want to do 2 years from now, or what insights they have about some great company or some horrible company, and having laughs over it or having excitement over it. And so that's how you build it, is having those shared moments of recognizing something together. And I think, most good managers and people, those experiences, the negative experiences, they tend to start falling quickly if you have good experiences.
Yeah. The proof is in the pudding often, and after those you prove, you even mentioned, we're going to live these values. This is how we're going to live. They're not just words on a website. They're not just on a plaque on the wall or the virtual wall, if that's but that these are actually what we're going to live by. I think that over time that proves to people that these are actually our values. They're not just words on a wall.
No.
There's a mentor of mine. He says, values aren't your values until they're tested. What have been, as you have led, and both here at Lantern and also previous experiences, what are those moments when your values have really been tested and you've had to say, are these really my values?
That's a wonderful question. I think, I think one of the early ones, at least in Lantern, was when we raised some capital. And one of the values I like to always think about is collaboration. But at the same time, companies like to own intellectual property and own data and own process. And so, the question came, how much do we invest in collaborations outside our 4 walls, and how do we make the most of that versus develop internally. And so early on, I'd learned that if you develop and manage collaborations with top global experts, you're going to get a lot further faster than you are if you do it on your own. And you may own everything, but owning 100% of a grape is a lot worse than owning 10% of a watermelon, right?
Mm.
And so when we did raise capital, we invested a lot in collaborations. So we have collaborations with Fox Chase Cancer Center, Georgetown, the National Cancer Institute, the Danish Cancer Research Society, University of Texas, Health Sciences. And yeah, they're challenging, but I would not change it. And I wouldn't spend those millions of dollars on developing our own lab people, because I'm convinced that long-term, science is going to be team-based. And we saw that with COVID-19. And so that's something I continue to push and talk about. And sometimes they do get tested, and there are mistakes and there are challenges that say, hey, if we controlled XYZ, we would control the timing, we would control this mistake in the data. And they do get tested, because we do get pushback, sometimes internally, sometimes from board members, hey, we should, but I still think that's a long-term right decision. We can get so much more science done in a team-based science that just the velocity and volume will be much greater by investing in the right collaborations and putting infrastructure in place to manage those. Another one that we're putting in place now that we've grown and are growing more is knowledge. We live in a very, very knowledge-intensive environment, especially at the forefront of data sciences, AI, and cancer biology. And stuff is changing every 3 to 6 months. I mean, so much new information, but not only that, but new knowledge, stuff we didn't even think about 2 years ago. So one of the things that we're putting in place is, I think we talk about knowledge. We have a great bar internally of like expecting people to know a lot on their own. But so we're going to invest in better knowledge infrastructure and better organizational knowledge development and coursework and other things for our employees, because it'll help us live and prove the value. Of course, it'll cost money and time, but at least it showcases for everyone internally and new employees that we're really serious about it. You better have your A+ game on all the time. This is not a place where you just come and punch in and do X, Y, Z and punch out. I want people who are committed to being A+ stars, who want to have knowledge. So only way to do that is to provide them the infrastructure to do it, right? At no cost. And so that's like you said, living the value. How do we make it easy for knowledge to be accessed by them? And then the other one is, we do have a big mission on getting this stuff to patients. And as much as I love and enjoy science, we've had to make tough decisions on investing in more science and AI versus on things that'll get us to patients faster. And those are tough decisions. We have to invest in information and knowledge and data, but if it's coming at the expense, both management's time and cycle and the expense of moving a program forward, we have to now rethink that. We just did that actually very recently with, we're in the process of that, of rethinking our organizational and staffing so that we can address gaps that we've seen in pushing our programs to patients faster, which means that if we have to live that, we have to do a lot more of that and organize around that. And that comes at the expense of not organizing around other things. And so those are all things where, values can be tested, and oftentimes the same values can go cross purposes.
Yeah. Those are, I love each of those little case studies you gave of okay, where are we going to put our money? And that often is where the test comes, is where are we going to put our money? And I think that's also a way that we build trust with those that we lead, is showing that we mean what we say. And we're going to put, to use the old expression, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. And it sounds like it's really a commitment. You call yourself a mission-driven company at Lantern. I would also add, it sounds like you're a values and mission-driven company.
Yeah, I think if you have the right set of values and the appropriate set of missions, you're going to generate better investor return. And so, I often cringe when I hear CEOs say, well, we're investor focused, investor driven. Well, okay, that's great, but what are you focused on?
Yeah.
We want to provide 16 cents back to every investor, not 8. Okay, well, I don't think investors are going to care too much about your return if you're going to be in jail for X, Y, or Z issues, or not accomplish your focus, that you told people you're going to do 3 years ago. So yeah. I think investor returns, as we've seen from this volatility in the stock market, aren't always up to us. But if investors know what you're focused on getting accomplished and why those accomplishments can translate into real tangible market value in your industry, then that's good. And today may be valued at 5x, tomorrow might be valued at 2.5x, 2 years might be valued at 12x. We don't know. There is going to be volatility in these emerging markets, emerging categories. But if investors know, here are the things that we're going to focus in on, and here's why, that to me is much better than saying, hey, I'm going to jump around for whatever penny I can pull. That I always cringe because I don't understand what that fully means. Because is it you're going to focus on EPS, you're going to focus on revenue growth, you're going to focus on EBITDA, you're going to focus on headcount, you're going to focus on, it's like it changes all the time. I was an analyst, I know. And we change the dynamic because we want to look at things every single way. But if you jump around on that, that is not a good way to operate a company.
Yeah.
And so, you say, look, here's what's going to create value in our industry, in our sector. We know that there's lots of data, and if you can use data better, faster, cheaper, you're going to be rewarded. We know drugs cost billions of dollars, and if you can do that half the cost, you will be rewarded. We know patients need more drugs. We only have 90 now. We want to get to 200. If you can provide 5 or 6 of those, you will be rewarded. We just know we know what things will make a difference. Focus on those things. Tell those investors, here's why those things are important. And so a lot of that is also, part of your job as CEO is to know when it's time to change some of those things and which ones to put more focus or less focus. But I think I always cringe when I hear that we're in shareholder investor focus. Well, shareholders want to focus on your impact as a company, not just, whether you make 2 cents on EPS or 3 cents. Yeah. That's nice, but that should come as a result of your strategic objectives and your broader mission, not just, financial engineering. And that's where a lot of companies get at a lot of fault. And that really should not be the first and foremost thing. We've seen companies like Valiant and all the pharma bros and all those things. Every time we focus too much on the financial engineering aspects in clinical and life sciences, there's a problem. And because we're in a very unique industry that can make a lot of reward by focusing on the right things. And so that's part of our job as CEOs to communicate that.
That feels this conversation, it feels like this truly is a conversation that many life science leaders aren't having and should be having, focusing on value and impact. And that feels like it fits this category of what we're after here. It feels like it fits that to a T. So I really appreciate you bringing that insight into this conversation. I'm sure we could jam for a long time, Panna, but we're up against the clock, and I'll just end with this question that we ask all of our guests, and is if you could go back to your either pre or early CEO self, for you that's nearly 20 years, and you could have a conversation with him, what would you say to him? What's the advice or the conversation that you would have with that younger version of you?
I've thought a little bit about that, and I still come back to one of, I think, 2 central things. I think I would tell myself to be a lot nicer, a lot nicer to everyone around me, people, interactions. You can get a lot of the same stuff done, but if you can do it by impacting people in a nice way, and I don't mean being a pushover, but I think there's a lot to be said, and I really enjoy interacting with people who leave me with a smile, and that doesn't always happen. And as I reflect back on that, I'm like, you know what? I could have been a lot nicer and still gotten a lot of the same things done, maybe even more. and I could have impacted people more positively by being nicer. And so that's one thing I try to do. I don't do it perfectly, but I really try.
Mm.
And the other one is network. I'm not a natural networker. I like to sometimes be very focused on, information and data and plans, and I'm good at that, but I think I did that at the expense of networking. So the two things I think I would tell myself is to be nicer and network a lot more.
Mm.
So those are
Those
it's still hard for me to do.
those are both really, really outstanding. Bana, this has been so much fun. I appreciate your heart, and I appreciate your willingness to pull back the curtain on your own journey, but also on what you would hope others might start talking about more. If folks that are listening or watching want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Obviously, there's information on LinkedIn. There's information on our website. There's podcasts like this I've done. So I think those are great. And I think if there are people who are interested in joining our growth and our journey, I think we're always looking for great people to join our team. So that's one thing hopefully that we'll also get is, great new people to join us.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put all those relevant links in the show notes. Again, thanks so much. I really appreciate everything you brought today.
Jeff, thanks a lot. I appreciate your time as well.